What's up everyone? Today we're going to do another TryHackMe video and we're going to solve this room, threat hunting pivoting. If you remember in a previous video, we went over this room where we demonstrated the threat hunting techniques to discover these stages of a cyber attack. In today's video, we're going to discuss the techniques that we can use to discover all of the pivoting attempts. As you can see, we have the discovery, privilege escalation, credential access, and lateral movement. So these are also techniques used by attackers. As threat hunter, you are interested in discovering these attempts in a network. So basically, remember that we will be using Elasticsearch to hunt for these tactics. That's why make sure the machine is on, the index is set to win log beat, and the time range is set up correctly. So if you remember, guys, you are given a set of logs where you're required to hunt for threats, meaning you have to make sure that there are no indicators of compromise based on the given logs. So as you can see here, we have around 4 tasks where with every task we're going to hunt for a specific attacker technique. So the first task, it is around the discovery, and in the discovery at the end we have 3 questions to answer. So before we start answering these questions, we're gonna have first to give a background information about the task. So in the discovery technique, remember that the attacker is enumerating the assets on your hosts after compromising one of the machines. So after the compromise, the attacker will attempt to enumerate for assets and other endpoints or hosts. So basically, they will attempt to use specific executables to discover the assets, such as they are listed here. So we have these executables. Scrolling down, yeah. So the task list, netstat, ipconfig, net, and hostname. These are used after the initial compromise, and attackers use them to retrieve as much information as possible about the host so that they can pivot to other hosts later down the road. The thing is that these tools are built in Windows operating system, and they can also be used by administrators. But that won't prevent us from trying to find out if they are maliciously used by other actors. So how are we gonna start? The first thing is we want to set the write index. Win log beat is used for collecting or displaying event logs. The next thing is we want to search for process creation events around these executables we talked about. So in the search field name, we're going to look for win log event. Underscore ID. Okay. So win log event, we're going to add it to the columns. And here we're going to search with win log one. Here we hunt for process creation events. Let's see how many events we can pull. Okay, we pull around 717 events. Okay, that's perfect. The next thing we want to do is to look for the processes that were spawned because of the process creation. So we can use and then in the process name, we can use the process name. Now we're going to put the list of the processes that we think the attackers may use to discover hosts or enumerate the current compromised host. This is the list, and it is taken from here. And we're going to update, see how many events we have. Okay, we have around 36 hits. Now we're going to add the relevant columns here to facilitate the process of investigation. That's how we're gonna use our username. We add host name, and we're gonna add the process information, such as the process command line, how it was executed, the process executable, the process name, and the parent process command line. You can also add the parent process name. And most importantly, we're gonna sort in an ascending order because we want to establish a chain of a timely chain of events. So we start with, as you can see, the process name here, or the parent process is CMD. As you can see, through CMD, whoami was executed to retrieve the current username on the machine. And as you can see, the username that executed this command was Bill Hawkins. So based on that, we can be seen that Bill Hawkins has executed multiple enumeration tools. We have whoami, we have ipconfig, and all of them were spawned by the CMD. So we know that system administrators may use these tools to retrieve information about the host. That's why we're gonna have to dig deeper on the use of this process. How? We're gonna need to find out what is the parent process of the command line processor here. So we're gonna modify the command here and look for, let's see here, win log event. We are still with winlog event ID _1 and process. We're gonna use the process ID here this time. So let's retrieve the process ID of CMD. So we're gonna drill down here and scroll down. Process name. The parent process ID is this. We're gonna have the parent process ID. So the process PID is 6324. If we update now, we have 2 hits. Now we want to look at the parent process. As you can see, we have now the events focused on the process CMD. To find out the parent process, we can look at the parent process name column. We can see it is PowerShell, and we can also locate the exact command that spawned CMD process. As you can see, it's a PowerShell process to download a text file from this domain name. Previously, we confirmed that that was a C2 server in the previous video. So now we can confirm that the commands that were executed earlier to retrieve system information were malicious in nature. They were executed by a malicious process. That's the original malicious process. Now let's see if there's a question to answer regarding this section. What's the name of the account seen to be executing host enumeration commands on DC01? Let's go back to the previous query, which lists the host enumeration commands. We want the account that executed the host enumeration commands on DC01. So we're gonna have to narrow down the results to the host name that is DC01. So here we're gonna put and host name As you can see, the username was backup ADM. That was the account. Alright, in the next paragraph, we are investigating the internal network scanning. Internal network scanning is where the attacker scans for the existence of other hosts. So now the attacker has compromised a specific host, say it is DC01. Now the attacker wants to know about other hosts on the network to compromise. So they will do what is called as internal network scan. To be able to discover internal network scan, we're going to have to change the index into packet beat. Packet beat will contain all the network information. So we're going to switch to packet beat here, and we're going to refresh with an empty query. Okay, now we're gonna have to execute a query here. So in the given task, we are given the network parameters. This is the subnet of the given network. Okay, here we are discovering, or we're trying to find out, the network scanning attempts on ports below 1024. I'm going to copy this command because it has the network information that we need. Let's take a closer look at this command here, or the query. As you can see, the source IP or the source subnet matches the destination subnet. And this is because we are trying to investigate the internal network scan. In internal network scan, the source IP is within the same subnet as the destination IP. Okay, and destination port rate is less than 1024 because we're looking to find out the internal scanning attempts on the most common used ports. So we have here around 41,000 hits. So what is the outcome we're looking to extract here? What's the outcome we're looking for here? The outcome we're looking for is to find out the IP address that is attempting the scans, what is the source IP address, and what is the subject or destination IP address that's being scanned. To be able to do that, we're going to have to extract statistical information. That's not enough. So we're going to have to save this query as internal scan, and then we're gonna go to visualize. In the visualize, we create a new visualization, select lens, and from the drop down here we select a saved query, internal scan. This loads up the query I have typed earlier, and then I can refresh, convert to table because it's the appropriate form of visualization for such query. Now we're gonna start picking up the fields. So first, the source IP, and then we want the destination IP address, now based on the table we can see that the highest count is coming from this IP address towards this IP address. Most probably this is the IP address of the compromised machine. The attacker got access to this IP address, or the machine matches this IP address, and now the attacker is performing scans against this machine. So in further investigations, we're gonna focus on this IP address as the IP address of the IP address of the compromised machine, and this IP address as the IP address of the machine that's being scanned. But what we want to do, what's the thing we're looking for here? We're looking for event IDs of 3. They identify the process that initiated the network connections coming from this IP to this IP. So we're going to keep the query as is. We're going to add and when log Of course, we're gonna copy this and go back to the Discover tab. Change to win log beat. So we have around 267 hits. Okay, the source IP here needs to be the IP address we highlighted earlier, which happens to be 10, 10, 184, 105. Destination IP is on the same network, which happens to be 10, 10, and now we scan again, and we have 11 hits. Okay. So as you can see, guys, the responsible process is N, an executable named N. That's the process initiating the scans. Let's cancel these columns. And maybe take a look at the destination port. So port. Okay, that's great. So now we have this executable process responsible for all the scans on all these ports. It's becoming now very clear. And we have Chisel. Probably the attacker is attempting or was attempting to do port forwarding from the machine they compromised into the machine which has the IP address ends with 219, maybe to establish a kind of tunnel and access internal resources on the ports that they scanned earlier. Okay, see if any questions we have to answer regarding this section. Following the port scanning activity investigation, what is the parent process of N? Okay, now you have to find out the parent process. To find out the parent process of this executable, remember, we're going to have to first find out the process ID of N. It's going to drill down here and find the process ID. The process ID is this 5804. I'm going to grab this ID, process PID. It's going to be 5804, and we can just type n.exe. So we have around 17 hits. Now we're going to add a new column here for the parent process. Okay. Let's see. Now we have a parent process that is PowerShell. And that's the exact command. So the parent process name is PowerShell. What is the full command line value of the ## process? That's for the last section. In the last section of this task, we're going to investigate Active Directory enumeration. So, what's the idea behind this? In Active Directory enumeration, after compromising a machine, you're looking to match the relationships between the objects and between different objects such as the users, groups, and computers. Usually when we get access to an Active Directory machine, we launch a tool called ## to match to find the relationships between the users, groups, and computers. So to start the investigation with Active Directory, we're going to have first to make sure we are on the wind log beat. Okay. And I'm going to update the query here. So we have around 49,000 events. So we're going to start investigating the use of such tools such as ## or loadhound. But first, to do that, we're going to have first to look at the LDAP connections, because in Active Directory environment, LDAP protocol is used most of the time. Let's look at the LDAP connections, and specifically we're going to look at the processes that are spawned with the LDAP, using the LDAP protocol. So first we're going to look at win log event _ID. I'm going to look for the network connections, not the processes spawned. The network connections on the LDAP source IP. It's going to be the subnet that we have 10 or 000/8, and the destination IP going to be on the same subnet. And lastly, destination port. It's going to copy it from here. Okay, so here we're hunting the network connections on the subnet here, and the ports, destination port is either one of these ports indicating an LDAP connection, and we're going to filter this process because this is the main process that is used to generate the administrative LDAP connections. We're going to exclude it here from the query because we want to look for malicious uses of LDAP scanning. So we're going to update. and we have nothing. One event ID 3. Let's do it one more time. So 10 hits. So process executable is partial here most of the time. So what is this? This is the network connections, specifically the LDAP connections on port 389 or port 636. Most of the time, or most of the entries are 389. We want to see the process that is initiating these connections. Remember that MMC is the executable that initiates LDAP connections on Active Directory environment. If we exclude this, all other entries are worth investigation. And we can see partial, we can see sharphound, and we can see chisel, which doesn't look good in an environment or in a clean environment. So now to answer the question, what is the answer for what is the full command line value of the sharphound process? So now we know that sharphound has been used on the Active Directory machine. We want to find out the exact command that initiated this executable. So we're going to first look at the process ID and find its parent process. So its PID is 1052. So process ID is going to be 1002, and you can use and sharphound. No matches. Let's go back. See if you got the process ID correct. It is 1052. Okay. Process ID. Oh, PID. It's going to be PID. And we look for this executable. We should have at least 2. We have 20 hits. Okay. We just want to find out what is the initiating process of sharphound. So we're going to look at the parent command line or parent process name, and we have 1 hit partial. Let's make sure we have sorted all of the entries correctly from in an ascending order. So we start with this, scrolling down we have partial, and we have this command. So basically this is the parent command line. Scrolling down, see if there's another command. Let's see here. Command. Parent plus command line, process command line. Okay, so that is the main process that executed sharphound. That was the parent process that executed sharphound, and lastly, that's the full command line process that sharphound executed. And we can put this as an answer. Okay, in the next task we are investigating privilege escalation attempts. Okay, in the first scenario we are investigating techniques of privilege escalation. Namely, in the task, 2 techniques were discussed: privilege escalation through C impersonate privilege and privilege escalation through service abuse. So first, let's discuss the first one, say C impersonate privilege. Make sure here we are on the winlog beat. We're going to refresh the query bar. First, we're going to clean the columns. We're going to keep the parent command line, parent executable. Okay, keep this as is. And then we're going to type win log event ID 1 and user name system. Here we're looking for process creation events where the username is system. We have around 258 hits. Before doing that, we want to make sure that the parent user here is not system. We're looking for a case where the user is the parent user is low privileged account and the subsequent user is system. That's how privilege escalation occurs. You start with low privileged account and then move into a higher privileged account. The username here needs to be system, so we can add an exclusion here and not when log event underscore data. I think we can find this here. Parent user. Okay, we have parent user. We can then use this to filter all of the instances wherein the parent user is net authority system. Because, as I told you, when the parent user is net authority system, okay, it means that the user initiated the query or triggered the event was actually the administrator. We don't want this. We want instances where the initiating user is not system, okay, discovering low privileged attempts on the system. So we can update and see if we have matches. We have 6 hits. We're gonna remove these for now. And we want to focus on the users. Username is here. When event data parent user. We can add subject username as well. Okay, that's for now. Let's see. Let's focus on the parent user. So we have a parent user here that belongs to the IIS server, the web server on a Windows Server machine. So basically, when an attacker first gets access to a machine, they are assigned a low privileged account. In this case, we can assume it is IIS. And then they spawn a process because we're focusing on process creation events. That user has spawned a process, namely the process name is the registry process name. And that was the query executed. And then the username here is system. So that's the parent user, and that is the resultant user, which means that when that user executed this command, the subsequent actions were performed under the system account, which indicates a successful privilege escalation. You can add another query, another field, maybe the process parent command line. So we can see that the parent process name, okay, was spoofer. So spoofer, that was the process executed by this user and resulted in another process named, which is the registration process, registry modification process under the system account. See what happened here? 2 users and 2 executables. So it was privilege escalation from that user into that user. To understand what happened exactly, we're going to have to investigate the spoofer executable because it's executable used by that user to move into the system user. And that's the main command line used for this. Okay, I believe there is a question to answer regarding this section. Let's see. What's the full command line value of the process spawned by spoofer? We have already the answer covered here. So that's the spoofer process, and spoofer initiated the registry modification process. The full command line of this process is this. Okay, that's the correct answer. Okay, now what we want to do, We want to investigate this process further. Is it malicious? What kind of malware is this? What kind of vulnerability that enabled the shift from IIS into the system user? We're going to have to investigate this executable, the main root cause. To do that, we're going to have to keep the win event ID as 1, process creation, and here we can use process name spoofer, or you can just use spoofer. It may work. Okay, let's see here. So spoofer has a parent command line or parent process name as PowerShell. So PowerShell spawned this process, and that's the exact command. What we can do is we can drill this down and look for hashes maybe. So we have the MD5 hash. And that's the command that was executed by spoofer. And look at this. This is the main culprit, the PowerShell command that spawned spoofer. And it has encoded values, which confirms the suspicion that indeed this might be a malicious process. Now apparently we have hashes here, SHA hash and MD5. We can take this and go to virus total. In the search, paste the hash. We can confirm the suspicion that this is a hack tool. Namely, it is print spoofer. So looks like the attacker has exploited the print nightmare vulnerability to escalate the privileges from a web server user into system user. What's the name of this other service that was abused besides SNMP trap? Now that's regarding the next section. Okay, now I have investigated the privilege escalation through impersonal privilege. We're going to investigate the privilege escalation through process abuse. So basically, in process abuse, what happens is most of the time we change the executable spawned by the service from the original one into a malicious one that we planned as an attacker. So to investigate that, for this to happen, the attacker has to modify the registry. So we're going to update the query here and look for registry modification events ID 13. Okay, here we're looking for changes in the registry that indicate that a process image or a service image or a service executable has changed. So you're gonna have to use AND here and use this path. That's the path used to reveal the changes on the service executable. Because again, a service is abused when its executable or original executable is changed. We're gonna remove this for now. Okay, now we want to find out what were the executables that were used to perform the change. We can have to look for maybe data here. When event data parent user. Nope. Okay, details. Okay, here it shows the executable that was saved in the registry, and that is the or the name of the service. As you can see, among the executables, we have one named as update. Let's take a look at the registry path. So we look for registry path. Okay, here we find the path in the registry that was changed. As you can see, in the path, we have the service name. So here we have SNMPTR and we have spooler. These were the services whose executables was changed. And in the details here, we have the executables that were used. So one executable that stands out is the update. And it was used in 2 services, according to the results here. So this means that the attacker has successfully changed the executable of these 2 services into update. Okay. To find out what are the commands the attacker executed to achieve this, we're going to have to drill this down and look at the surrounding documents. Okay. Going to have to increase this into 20. So see, we have the use of this executable. This executable is used to manage services, starting, stopping, or restarting a service. So when an attacker changes the executable of a specific service, they would use this tool. Okay. Now, making sure that the order is set correctly in the time, the chronological order has to be in ascending order. So it looks like it is set up correctly. So starting with the first one here after this, you can see the use of command line interpreter. Let's look at the command used here. So here the attacker spawned. Oh, look at this. So that's the process command line. As you can see, the attacker used CMD to launch the executable responsible for managing the services. And specifically what they did, the changes affected this service, SNMP trap, where the binary path, meaning the executable name, was changed to this value. So now we can see the original command the attacker has executed to change the service path. Now we can say that the attacker successfully has abused the service named SNMP trap by changing its original executable to what looks like or what appears to be the payload. Look at the next event. Again, the use of the command line interpreter, and scrolling down, looks like here we don't have anything to investigate. Okay, now the other one. The other one is for the service management, and we can see the same command. And if you want to find the user responsible for this change, you can look at maybe the username. So the username is Bill Hawkins. That's the username who performed this change. And the question here is, what is the MD5 hash of the update binary? Okay, to find MD5 hash of this binary, we're gonna have to focus on the name of the binary in addition to process creation events around this binary. So here we can say win log event ID 1 and maybe process name update. We only want the MD5 hash. So we start with the first event. Let's look for an MD5 hash. And this is the MD5 hash. That's your answer for this question. Okay, in the next task, we're going to investigate credential access. Credential access is the stage where the attacker would attempt to dump credentials from the machine they have compromised. It could be a Windows machine or Linux machine, and there are many techniques to dump credentials using Mimikatz or the LSAS process and so on and so forth. But here we're focusing on the Windows endpoints. Okay, so in credential access, first we start with the LSAS credential dumping. Exactly. And we have other techniques as well, such as DC sync attacks. We're going to investigate them after we finish with this. Okay, so now let's investigate this one, LSAS credential dumping. Usually, when an attacker dumps credentials using the LSAS process, it's the process responsible for the credentials, by the way, or authentication. And when the attacker attempts to dump credentials, they will target this process. Most of the time, the attacker uses Mimikatz to accomplish this. In order to use Mimikatz, the attacker will need to launch Mimikatz, meaning they will eventually launch a process. So here we're looking for process creation events again. And here we need to find out what kind of artifacts that Mimikatz leaves when it is executed, or what kind of strings Mimikatz uses in its command line. So basically, or fortunately for us, the author has them here for us. We're gonna just copy them. These strings are found in the command line when Mimikatz is executed. We can update and look for such signs. And we have 3 hits. Okay, let's remove these for now. And we're gonna add command line. Okay, as can be seen here, guys, we have the process CMD attempted to dump credentials using Mimikatz from the LSAS or LSAS credentials. It can be very clear that Mimikatz was used here in more than one command, and that's the main process, WMI. Okay. What happens after the attacker dumps the credentials? What happens is a file is created containing these credentials. Okay, in order to find out what kind of file that was, we're gonna have to create a new query here. When log event underscore ID, it's gonna be 11 file creation events, and file path DMP. DMP is the extension of the file that has been created. It's the extension when LSAS credentials are dumped. Let's see what kind of file. What's the name of the file that was dumped? So as you can see, guys, we have a process named Task Manager involved in this. Let's find out here through the filters or through the fields. Click on file directory and add file name and file path. It's very clear that a file was created named LSAS, and it is under this path, temp. Now it's very clear that the attacker was successful in dumping the credentials, and they used this process, Task Manager. Any questions to answer regarding this task? Let's see. What's the name of the process that created the LSAS dump file? It is Task Manager. We already answered this one. Okay, the next one is it's going to be a little bit not difficult but complicated. So here we're looking at DC sync attacks or domain controller sync attacks. So what is DC sync first? DC sync is a process of syncing credentials and information in the domain controller between objects. Like information is replicated between the objects to make sure that everything is up to date and the changes are replicated. So basic or synced. So it uses DC sync. Thing is, attackers abuse this to harvest credentials. And in order to uncover this query was created. So first, let's copy this query. Okay, First, what is event ID 4662? It is related to directory service object access, and it is the kind of event that is triggered when there is a synchronization between domain controllers or between objects in a domain controller. So the first step is looking at events satisfying this criteria. As you can see, we have the access mask and the data properties. So why are these, by the way? Because these are the properties used by privileged accounts. A DC sync attack is successful when the changes are replicated by or using these IDs. If we detect them in the logs, okay, it's either performed by the original system administrator or by another user. If we find another user that's low privileged performing these changes, okay, this could mean, or this definitely means, that an attacker has used a low privileged user to conduct this attack. So if we refresh here, we're gonna have to cancel or remove these columns and add a new columns. Okay, and here we're gonna add user. We're gonna look at the users. User, we have user here. User domain, gonna add this, but no values. Winlog event data parent user. Subject username. Okay, and let's take a look at the properties or the access properties. Okay, let's remove this. As you can see, we said, guys, that these identifiers are found when a DC synchronization happens or domain controller synchronization happens. Thing is, these identifiers are only or can only be used by privileged accounts like administrators. But when we see them associated with low privileged accounts, we start to suspect that there is a DC sync attack taking place. And indeed, it is the case here. So what we have to do, we have to investigate further what kind of changes that this account has done on the machine. So we can hunt for first the process creations. What is the process that this account used to launch the DC sync attack? One and user.name backup. Okay, remove these, and we're going to add command line. You can also add a process. Okay. So these are the processes that the account backup ADM has executed. Scrolling down to look for unusual processes. And there you go. There is one command line process executed using WMI privilege, and that's the exact command. Looks like it's writing the output of the command to the admin share. These were suspicious uses of CMD here by this account. So the conclusion here is, guys, that this account definitely has been compromised by the attacker and is being used to conduct further attacks. Questions to answer. Let's see. Out of the 4 GUIDs used to hunt DC sync, what's the value of the GUID seen in the existing logs? We already highlighted this, guys. It is this one. What's the name of the first process spawned by Jade Burke. Okay, this is for the other section. So in the other section, guys, we're going to investigate brute force accounts. We already covered this partly in the previous video where we investigate initial access attempts. In the initial access attempts, the attacker would try to access authentication servers, SSH, radio server. But here we're looking to look for internal brute forcing attacks. The attacks that occur once the attacker is inside the network. They're trying to brute force other servers. So to uncover these, first we're going to have to extract as the methodology in every brute force investigation. We're going to have first to uncover the failed attempts. So to do that, we're going to have to update first here. And we're going to look at event ID, log event underscore ID 4625 indicates failed authentication attempts. We have around 109 or 109 failed authentication attempts. So it's worth investigating these and see where the highest count is coming from. So we're going to save this as new and say brute force. Head over to visualize, select lens, and then select brute force. Table. Switch from packet beat to Windows log beat. Okay, so now first let's search for hostname. And let's search for the username. Okay, as you can see, guys, most of the brute force attempts or failed authentication attempts highlight the user Jade Burke on this machine. So what kind of, we have to find out what is being brute forced, what the attacker is trying to access. Okay, we're gonna have to investigate further this username with the failed authentication attempts. We're gonna have to use and user name Jade Burke. I'm gonna copy this and go back. Okay, so we have around 91 hits. But remember, in these brute force attempts, we want to find out what is being brute forced. Is it a radio server, SSH server, or could be SMB server? To find this out, we're going to have to look at something called the logon type. So logon type here is 3. Logon type of 3 indicates a network authentication. Looks like the attacker is trying to access maybe SMB server or maybe WinRM server. Let's see if we have IP addresses associated with these events. Look at the source IP. So they are coming from this IP address. Okay, so these are failed authentication attempts. Now, if we assume that the attacker was successful, we would need to look for now successful attempts, because after hundreds of failed attempts, the attacker would eventually get access if they were successful. We're going to change this from 4625 into 24. Keep the other name as is and update. See if there were successful attempts, and there is. We have 17 hits. Okay, and they're all coming from this source IP address, and that's the workstation. So now we confirm the theory that the attacker now got access to the workstations, but using what? SMB or WinRM? We're gonna have to dig deeper. That's why we're gonna use now the process creation events using this username. So we're gonna remove this and say it is 1. So now we have process creation events, and we're gonna have to look at the process itself. So process, command line, executable, name. You can add all of them and sort in the ascending order. Now look at the commands. After this log entry, we have whoami commands being executed. We have net commands and other sort of commands. This confirms that the attacker was successful in accessing the server, and these are the commands that they executed. Now the question here is, let's see, what is the name of the first process spawned by Jade Burke? The process name, or the first process name, is this. It's the first in the entry. Make sure you sort these in an ascending order to get this result. And lastly, we're looking at lateral movement. So in lateral movement, the attacker is successful in getting access to other resources on the network and accessing other hosts or servers. First, we're going to investigate the use of WMI, which is Windows Management Instrumentation. So when an attacker uses WMI by launching WinRM sessions, they are actually performing lateral movement. So first, let's clear the query bar and look for indications of using the WinRM in the logs. First, we're going to start as usually with winlog event underscore ID. It's going to be 1. Okay. Now remember that to launch or to use Windows Management Instrumentation in lateral movement, there are specific processes that are used. So here, the process name is WMI PRVSE. And I'm going to copy this and look for signs of using this process. Don't forget the and. Ascending order, and let's see here. So indeed, there are uses of this process in the parent command line or as a parent executable. And the username used this process is Clifford Mill. And looking closer here, we can see that the process that was spawned is CMD. And these were the commands that were executed by CMD. This is an indication of accessing the admin share and storing commands inside of it. And it has the signature of WMI exec in Impacket Tools. WMI Impacket. So this is a tool used as part of the Impacket suites. Similar approach to SMB exec, but executing commands through Windows Management Instrumentation. This pattern is clearly found here. Okay, so let's look at the surrounding documents here. Taking a look at the first one, and I click on View Surrounding Documents. So why are we doing this? We want to find out how the attacker got access to this workstation through the Windows Management Instrumentation. Probably they did this through launching WinRM. Of course, you know what is WinRM. Management protocol used by Windows to remotely communicate with another server. Usually attackers use it to log into other servers. So let's see if it was used here. Increase this to 20. And we're going to create a filter here. WinLog. Going to be is, and the value is going to be 4,624 successful authentication attempts. Okay, see, this one is where the attacker started to execute system commands through WMI. Let's look at the events that come before this one. Starting with this one, event action logged in. What command they executed here? Let's see. So here it is not clear what command they executed. It is just that it was a successful login. The next one. Again, here we see nothing. Let's take a look at the one that directly precedes the command in question or the event in question. An account was successfully logged on. But still, we cannot see the exact commands. Anyway, let's go up and drill down on this. So we see it's a successful logon, and the username is Clifford Miller, and that's the source address. That's the source IP where the attack came from. Of course, it's internal because we are talking about lateral movement here, moving from one workstation into another workstation. Okay, now we have all the information we need about what happened. Let's see if there are questions to answer. What is the name of the account that also used WMI on this workstation aside from Clifford Miller? Okay, we're gonna go back. And we're going to repeat the same query here that we used earlier. We're looking for other usernames other than Clifford Miller. It's going to be easy to find Jade Burke. Or what you can do, you can just use and not username Clifford Miller. Yeah, and we directly have this value. Okay, next we're going to investigate the next section. It's going to be lateral movement, maybe through pass the hash. Exactly, pass the hash. Pass the hash is another tactic where an attacker can log in into another server workstation without the use of a password. They can just use a hash they have already dumped from a machine or specific username. We're gonna have to look for signs of using pass the hash. So the first thing we have to do is we are still looking at successful authentication attempts. Okay, so event ID 4624. Okay, and then since this is a network authentication, we're looking at event logon type to be equal to 3, right? And what comes next are values specific to pass the hash. Luckily for us, they are here. I'm gonna copy them. As you can see, the logon process name has to be this value or contains this string, and data length is 0. Okay. We want to find out the offending IP address that performed pass the hash. Now we have the usernames and the workstations. We're going to exclude this one, anonymous logon, since it is known as false positive value. We can see that there are usernames such as Clifford Miller and we have Jade Burke. We have to find the IP address. So we start with the first one. For example, Clifford Miller drill down on the event details message, and we can see the source IP address which they used to log in. Now to investigate further, what we can do, we can click on view surrounding documents. Okay, what we want to find out, we want to find out the exact command that the attacker used to launch past the hash. Okay, so here we're looking to increase the number of documents into 20, and we can add folder where we're going to specify win log event underscore ID. It's going to be 1. Why? Because we're looking at the processes that will respond to execute past the hash. Okay, the first one. So here we are, Clifford Miller, the first one. Let's see here. I think it's here where they logged in. We don't want this. And that's where executed the commands on the Windows management instrumentation. Looks like we're gonna have to exclude some events here. Let's look at this one. And also here we can see commands similar to the commands we saw earlier when we were investigating the use of WMI. Looks like both attempts or both ways were closely connected to each other. The attacker using WMI and passed the hash to execute these commands, which would confirm the theory that first they logged in using pass the hash and then executed the commands through WMI. The questions, what's the name of the account? We answered this. We're gonna keep this at the end, and excluding the executions of the CD command, what's the full command line value of the subsequent process spawned after the first pass the hash authentication of Clifford Miller. The first command that was executed after the successful authentication, so that was the one with successful authentication. Now the next event should list the first command they executed. Now this one contains the CD. We can exclude this as the question requires. Looking at the next one, also this has CD. We can exclude it. And we're looking here at this one. And now this one doesn't have CD, and it's the first command. This is the command that was first executed. Excluding the false positive account anonymous login. How many events were generated by potential pass the hash authentications? So we're going to go back. This is for, oh, it looks like we're gonna have to rewrite the query one more time to list the events. So here we're gonna exclude anonymous logon. So we're gonna write another query and not user name anonymous logon. Update, and we have 10 hits.